Hello guys, welcome to today's session, and today we'll be moving forward with our banking application API. Today we'll be creating the API that accepts deposits. So we know that we should be able to deposit into our banking application, which is part of the functional requirements. The user should be able to deposit. So there are some things that we must put in place for a user to be able to deposit into their wallets or wallets that we've created for them. So to start with, let's get into it. Um, if you remember, during the last session, we created the account service interface and it contains some methods. Though we have not implemented most of the method here. So if we go to I'll just close most of the other stuff that we don't need for now. So all we need for now is the account service and the account service interface. So I think I need to rectify this. So those are the two things that we need right now. As you can see on my screen, this is the current account service interface. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create the method needed for depositing in our account service interface. So to start with, let me just copy and paste, then deposit. So that's the functionality we want to implement, and we are including it in our interface. For a deposit, we are going to need some parameter. The major parameter we are going to need is we are going to need a parameter called deposits DTO. I will get here, don't worry. So DTO, we can just call it deposit DTO. Then that's the major thing that we need. For creating a deposit DTO, the major component for if you are going to make a deposit, right? There are some parameter that you are going to need. If you go into a bank and you need to make a deposit, you are going to need to supply the account number. So let me create the class, new class, PHP class, deposit DTO. We create it. So our deposit DTO will require the first thing is a string of the account number you want to deposit into, right? The next thing we need is amount that is to be deposited. It can be an integer and it can be a float. And the next thing we need is a description about the deposits. The account number here is the account number you are depositing into. Receivers account number. So the next thing we need is next thing we need is a description, something like a description or narration for our deposits. So this can be string, it's not compulsory, and it can be no description. So the next thing we need now is category. So the reason why we need category is if you check our functional requirements, one of the things that is required of us is the user should be able to see their transaction history categorized by deposit or withdrawal, right? And the user should be able to download their transaction within a specific date. So so the reason why we are setting this category is because we know it is a deposit category, of course, but at the end of the day, we still need it as part of the DTO. You will understand why we need it later on. So the string, and we're expecting category. So the category here do is deposit, but we'll get there. We will set it. We want to follow the method that we have been using all this while. So I'm going to generate a getter, setter, getter and setter for all of these methods. So for the get account number, it will be get account number. For set account number, it will be set account number. Amount to be the same. So where the difference will come is when we want to set the category. So currently we have two types of category currently. We have the withdrawer and we have the deposit category, if you are following me. So now let's create enums. New folder. I want to create enums. And the reason why I'm creating enums is because I want the categories to be flexible. I don't want to use the SQL enum folder, because if I need to add another type of enum, I will need to go to the database to create another enum, which I don't want. So I want to be able to see the type of enums that are available within the code base itself. So I'll call this transaction category enum. Yeah, right. So this will basically contain case. Can call it withdraw. Is that I am performing a withdraw or withdraw. Yes, something is wrong. Okay, yeah. Or you are performing a deposit, which is the current implementation we are doing. So deposits, correct. Should I call this withdraw? Let me just call this withdraw. The type of withdraw. uh, withdraw. Let me call it withdraw. So is that how you are performing a withdrawal or you are performing a deposit? So if we go into our deposits DTO now, what we'll now do is upon setting the category, we know that it will always be a deposit. So we are going to say transaction category deposits, then the value. That is it. So this is to tell you that um our category type for deposit DTO will always be a type of deposits. So let's get into it. So if we go back to our account interface, let's import our deposit DTO. Import. Now let's go ahead to implement the method in our account service. So let's go ahead to implement the deposit method. So the first thing we need to do is let's just implement method. So the method I want to implement is the deposit method here. So just students. Yeah, okay, correct. So the first thing, in order to deposit into an account, Um, so the first thing we need to check is we need to make sure that the amount being sent to us is greater than our minimum amount of deposits. So we could say probably we could say minimum deposits is equals to, let's say, 500, right? So if we agree that minimum deposit is equals to 500, so the deposit that is sent to us, we can now check if um, deposits, okay, if deposits is deposit DTO, sorry, DTO dot get amount is less than our minimum deposit, then we can throw an exception. You know, my system is really, really dragging, which is quite unusual. So just bear with me, guys. I don't know, my system is dragging really, really, really bad. So we can say throw new amount to low low exception. So we need to create the amount to low exception. So in order to create the amount to low exception, we are going to be creating it in the folder called exceptions, like so. So in the exception, we need to specify the message. So it needs a constructor, and we need to call the parent constructor, since we will be extend exception, the base exception in Laravel. We need to call the parent constructor, parent construct. So it accepts a message. We call it amount to low, or let's say amount. Let's say let's call it deposit amount to low. So that is much more explanatory. Uh, Let me refactor, rename to this. So deposits, the spelling is not correct. Deposits. Refactor, factor, rename. Yeah. So deposit to the exception. So let me put this in view. View. Here, enter presentation mode. Okay, now so deposit. So we can say deposits amount must be greater than, let's say, dollar amount. So this can accept an amount. Let's go to the account service. Account service. Okay. Yeah, so this will be this. I'm sorry. That will be our minimum deposit amount. We need to import this exception deposits. Yeah. So now, if a user tries to deposit amount that is below 500, we throw an exception that will undo in our undo method, of course. So the next thing we want to do now is we want to make sure. So in order for a user to deposit money into an account, there are some couple of things we must put into perspective. The first thing is we need to lock that particular account for updates. Then so this is to prevent multiple deposits. So let's say, for example, the user, maybe for some reason, the deposit button, or for some reason, we try to do, if we check the Laravel documentation, lock for updates. According to Laravel documentation, lock for update will lock the selected row until the end of the transaction. This means that the example provides the rows may contain values of blah, blah, blah. So what this basically does for us is we are going to open a transaction for deposits in the database level. So if anything goes wrong during the process of depositing into that particular account, our if anything goes wrong, every other change that we must have made will be rolled back. So that's why, let's say, for example, you are trying to send money into an account and an error occurred. What this will do for us is, if an error occurred, it will roll back everything. So an immediate rollback is done, and the changes will not be affected. So let's get into it. So let's open a transaction, try, and we catch the exception like so. So the first thing is we need to get the account we want to deposit into. So account query. I want to create a query for the account. I think we've already created a query. So account query. That will be this model query where account number, that is the account number to be deposited into, is that will be deposits DTO get account number, right? So the first thing we need to check is, does this account exist? Account exists. We'll pass in the account query variable. So we need to create this method. Let's add the method. So the method, we accept the builder, and we'll return we say if the account query exists, right? if it exists, if it does not exist, if it's this means if this is false, that is the account, sorry, false. That is the account does not exist. So if the account exists is false, then we want to throw an exception to state that the account number is invalid. So we say throw new invalid account number exception. We undo all of this method one after the other. All of this exception one after the other. So if we go to our exception folder, new PHP class exception folder, it will extend the exception base class. Then the same thing we did here. I don't know why this is throwing an error code this next. So copy this invalid account number, paste. So we say no counts. You can call it, I'm trying to think of, let's just call it invalid account number. Invalid account number. Is the account, is invalid the correct word? Because invalid account number could mean, okay, the account number length is less than 10 or something. So let's leave it at that for now. We'll come back to it if we need to change it. So we import the class invalid account number. This does not expect any message. I don't know why this is being change signature manually. Okay. So if we come back to our service, invalid account number, we throw it. Otherwise, we return for we don't need to return anything since we are throwing an exception. We don't need to return anything. So account exists. So we don't need to return anything since, let's change this to this and let's add this to our documentation. I think it's be nice for us to actually to add this method to our interface. So let me just copy the method, account service. This is the method, account service, make it public. It's public. So the accounts, okay, this is throwing an error. Okay. So now that we have that in place, so if the account exists, we won't get any exception. And if it exists, an exception will be thrown. So now that we have that in place, we can then go back to our deposit method. So if this line goes through, then that means we have no problem. I don't want to catch it. So that means we have no problem. So the next thing we want to do now is get the accounts. Let's get the locked accounts and say account query.
Finder hasn't added
query,
support for that with
account query.
I'm not sure I understand.
Account query. So we've already queried for where account number here. So all we need to just use is first look for updates. log for updates, and get the first one, right? So the next thing we now want to do is we want to get the accounts DTO. Remember, I don't know if we've created accounts DTO. So we need to create accounts model DTO. Let me just do this. Accounts DTO equals to accounts DTO from model. I'll pass in the logged account into it. So I will just create this new file PHP class accounts DTO. So our account DTO will contain basically all the properties of our account number model. So the first one we need is the private int ID. Then we need private int user ID. That is the owner of the account, user ID. Then private string account number, private string um this will be floats. Let's say balance. Let me check where's our migrations to be sure of all the properties it has. Migrations accounts. So let me just accounts. We have balance. Interesting. There are some stuffs that are missing. Balance. Then they created it and deleted it. I think we are good. Let me import the class. Balance. Then we need the created as and updated as. This should be a carbon. To be created as updated as. Updated as. So we'll need some methods, essentially the first method we need here is the from model method. So let's add the method. Of duplicates, remove objects, remove the qualifier, remove these. So we don't want it to be null. We want it to be, we don't want it to be a build at all. We don't want null. It must always be an account model. So for this, I'll be using, so let's generate the getters and setters. I'll be using the Fluent API for this since I don't really need, I'll be generating getters and setters, and I'll be using the Fluent setters for this. I don't need, okay. So the Fluent setter basically allows us to chain our methods like that, like so. So we can say DTO new self. So DTO sets ID, ID. That will be model. our logged account. So let me just call it account ID. I want to set the account number. I want to set the user ID, set user ID. That will be account user ID. I want to set account number, account number. We want to set balance, set balance of the account balance. So basically, those are the major stuffs that we need for this particular um, DTO. No, it's not going to be void, of course. We don't we return the DTO, which is basically so. So you will notice that we are not using this. The reason why we are unable to use the this here is because what we are calling is a static method. So if we go back to our account service now, we've passed in the locked account. You can see that it is working quite well. I can just mark this for account so that it will know it is an account. So the exception, we'll just call exception, an exception. So we'll be handling the exceptions we are throwing here in the handle method in our exception class. So I remember I said I wanted to put all of this in a transaction. So to wrap it in a transaction, we do db facade begin transaction. Then if all goes well, we do db facade commit transaction. So what this will do for us is it will start a transaction. It will wrap all the methods under between here and here in a transaction. Then if anything goes wrong, the first thing we want to do is we want to roll back the transaction. Then we want to log the transaction, the error that occurred. We don't need to log it since we are logging it. So then we want to throw the exception that occurred. So we are throwing the exception that occurs, account DTO. Then once we get the account DTO, we need to, number one, we need to deposit the user's account. Then we also need to generate a transaction. Remember, for every deposit we make, we must generate a transaction for that particular deposit. And that is why we have the deposits, we have the transactions table, which is going to hold a bunch of details. So let's go back to the account service. Bear with me. Let's go back to the account service. So if you come back to the account service, one thing we need is we need a transaction DTO. A transaction DTO is the same thing we have been doing for our account DTO, user DTO. It's basically going to contain all the necessary stuffs that is needed for a transaction to be generated. So for our transaction DTO, let's create a transaction. So we need a transaction DTO. transaction PTO. We'll call it from so for this one, or for this transaction PTO, what I will be doing is it will be, this one will be a constructor. So it will be a class with a constructor compared to other DTOs that we have been creating. And the reason why this is quite different is because the rest, we have a particular way of passing data into their DTOs. But this will be using the transaction in multiple places, and we want to make sure that all required methods are passed into the class. So I will need so our transaction requires, so let's go to the transactions model. So what can we do here? Skills reference, user ID. Okay, let me just copy it. I'll go to the transaction service. Import class. So it will need some bunch of data. We'll comment it out. So the first thing that we are going to need is the ID, private int ID. Then we need the reference. This will be a string reference. Then we need the user ID. That is the user that actually owns the particular transaction that is being initiated. Then we need the account ID. So the kind of transaction we'll be keeping is what we call double entry in finance. If we search for double entry accounting, so double entry is a method of recording transaction where every business transaction an entry recorded at least two accounts as debit or credit. In a double entry system, the amounts recorded as debit must be equal to the amounts recorded as credit. So that means if a deposit is done into our system, let's say 500,000 is sent into an account A, we will record transaction for account A, and we record transaction for account B that actually sent the transaction. So that's the kind of transaction method that we are using. So the private, then we call it amount. We need the amount that was transferred. Then we need the category of the transaction. Category. Then we need the description of the transaction. Description of the transaction. Then we need the date the transaction took place. What did we call it? We call this dates. Then we need if the transaction has been confirmed. Although for what we are building, since we are building a virtual wallet and we are not connecting to any external source, we don't really need the confirmed. but let's just do it for prosperity's sake. Confirmed. Then we need the created at and updated at. Created at the updated at updated at. So that is done. Let's include the account ID, the transfer ID. So let's include those ones too. Transfer ID, and we need the balance. So the balance is basically a column that we'll be using to hold the current balance of both the depositor and the creditor at the point that transaction was done. So this will help us when we are generating our account statement. Balance, then we need, we pick description, we pick transfer ID, we pick every other thing. So yeah, we need the metal. Metal is basically something to hold extra details for us, though I'm not sure we will need this yet. So let me remove this. So now we need some couple of things. We need some couple of things, right? Some stuff can actually be null. Some stuff can be null. Int, for example, this can be null. I will explain why this can be null later on. This can be null. Account ID cannot be, or user ID cannot be null. For the beginning of generating, this cannot be null as well. Category, we need a description. Description can be null. If we check our database, a lot of some stuffs can be null. So description is nullable, meta is nullable, as I said. So if we go back to our DTO, description can be nullable. This can be null too. Now, let's think about it. What are the things that we actually need to perform a deposit? So let's say, let's generate a transaction, or let's generate a transaction DTO instance for deposits. So let's call this public function from on, let's call it for deposits. So if we are going to be performing a deposit, the first thing we need is we need the account DTO. Account DTO. We need the amount. We need the amount that is being deposited. Let me call it amount is just fine. So it can be a float and it can be an int. We need the category. We don't need a category. We know it is always going to be a deposit, so we are fine with that. Then we need description. Let's remember this can be null. It's nullable. So in order to generate it, then we need new, say, return new transaction DTO, transaction DTO. And we've not generated the setters and getters, so let's generate the setters and getters. Getters and setters, all of it. Or is only ID that was generated? Getters and setters. Shouldn't I be able to select all like that? So, should I use the fluent? Okay, we are using the fluent already. So, all we can do is DTO, TO. So, so we can say DTO set the ID. For this particular transaction DTO now, we don't have the ID yet. So we need to, as at the point of generating the deposit DTO, a deposit DTO ID, we could just give it, let's make it nullable. Let's make it nullable. Because as at the point of generating the transactions DTO, we don't have the transaction ID yet. So we can't set the ID of the transaction. However, we can set the user ID, that is the person performing the transaction. And that will be that will be the account dot get user ID. We can set um, we can set the reference, set reference. So we are expecting reference to, let me just put reference. Reference is a necessary string. Reference, reference. Then we set account ID, account DTO ID, and we set the amount. That will be the amount that was passed. Then we set the category, that will be amount, that will be category, that will be passed. Okay, our category will be deposit, of course. So we have the enum. We've already created the enum for that. If we check our enums, we have the transaction category enums. So transaction category enum, deposits value. Then we need set the dates, carbon now. Then the description, set description, description. So we have that in place. Then we return the DTO. So if we go back to our account service, we can say transaction for to be new transaction for deposits. How come it's not coming up? Deposits. Account service deposits. No way, this is transaction detail. Is it not public? It's public. So this should be so. I don't know. Something is wrong. Okay, let me do something. Say transaction detail. Let's do this. Then we can say transaction detail. Okay, it works now. So the next first thing we need to pass the account DTO, which is we already have that. Then the next thing we must pass is the amount to be deposited. Deposit DTO, get amount. Let me put this on another line. Amount. Then we need the category. We don't need the category since the reference. We need the ref for deposit. It's assets, account DTO, reference. Okay. Reference. We need to find a way to generate our reference. So let's create a new service. This service we are going to call it transaction service. And the first method will be adding to our transaction service is the generate reference. So public, I could public function generates reference. So our reference, it will be a string, of course. So let's just say return string upper str. These are the string that I want. I want the illuminate string class, illuminate support string class. Upper cf transaction, then a slash, then you could use anything. Then we want to get the carbon now. Then I want to get the timestamp in milliseconds. Get timestamp. Get timestamp in milliseconds. This will make sure that our reference will always be unique. Then okay. Then we want to add another, then a string, random string, str again, random string, let's say length of 4. So this, what this does for us is this generates a random string. This gives us the current timestamp in milliseconds as at the point of generating this reference. Then a random string of 4. So this way should help us. Milliseconds is the least seconds that is possible. So for every time this reference method is called, a different timestamp is generated for us. So if we go back to our account service, I will need to pull in the, I would like to pull in the transaction private read only transaction service. Is that correct? This requires a comma. So once we get this, so we say this transaction service generates reference. Okay, this should actually come. So for deposits, we have the account detail reference, the amount, then the description. Description is an input that will be coming from the user. So that will be deposit DTO description, right? So this is what we need. So we've generated the transaction DTO. The next thing we need to do now is we need to create a deposit, a deposit type of transaction in our database, right? So in order to create that, I will be making use of an event. So I will raise an event called on deposit event, make event, and call it deposit. Let me call it new. Then we just call it deposit event. So deposit event. So our deposit events will require some couple of things. So let me just raise the event here. Event new deposit event. So to deposit, our deposit should require the transaction DTO. It will also require the account DTO, and it will require the logged accounts, right? The reason why we are passing the logged accounts is that's the accounts that we want to actually deposit money into. So if we go into our deposit event, we will need some couple of we need to initiate all the items that we've actually passed in. The first thing we passed in, if we check our account service, we passed in all of this. I'll just copy and paste deposit events. So this will be public, read only. It will be of type transaction DTO. This will be of type account DTO. And this will be of type account model itself. So we have that in place. So now in Laravel, when you create an event, you have to create a listener to actually listen to that event. So we'll need to make a listener, we need to make a listener listener deposit listener. So our deposit listener is where we'll be doing all the shenanigans of depositing into their user account and doing all sorts of things. So in our deposit listener, our deposit listener will accept a type of event called deposit event. So the deposit event, so the first thing we need to make sure is we need to make sure that the type of transaction passed into our deposit event has the type of deposit. So if we say if event, the transaction DTO gets category, transaction DTO, that category is not equals to transaction DTO or category enum of type deposits, then we don't want to do anything. We'll just return no. So we don't want to do anything in this place. We'll just return basically. So so next thing we want to do is we want to create the transaction. So let's get the account. So we'll say, so the next thing is we want to get the account, our account, the account that was passed equals to events locked account. And we want to increment the account balance by the transaction amount. So that would be account balance plus, right? Then we want to save. It. Then after saving it, we want to get the latest account from the database using the Laravel refresh. So this will get you the latest account model in the database. Then we want to create, so at the beginning of, we want to create the transaction, right? We want to create the transaction. Now, remember that in our transaction database, we have something called confirmed. And initially, it is false, right? Initially, it is false. So if we come back to our listener, there is something we must do. Listener. Before depositing the user account, we must create a transaction, right? So we'll say, so here we will need the transaction service. And the transaction service, let's just private read only. This transaction service creates transaction, right? So we need to create this method in our transaction service. Let's add the method, and the transaction service, it will expect the transaction DTO event transaction DTO. So let's add the method. So it's expecting the transaction DTO. So in order to create a transaction, so all we need to do is create the transaction, right? So let's create that almighty transaction service. There is something we created in our account service here so that we can keep reusing our model transaction service. We need to create an interface for this, of course. Let's create an interface for our transaction service. All we need is an interface, new PHP class, interface. So our transaction service interface, we have the general method that we've been using to have this, and it will be returning a builder as usual. Then we need to add all the methods that we've created so far. We need the create transaction, uh, then we need the generate reference. We need the generate reference. Then we need a method to get a particular transaction. So we can get a transaction either by reference or by transaction ID, transaction by reference. Then we need to get transaction by ID. We can get a transaction by ID. We can get all the transactions that has occurred for a particular account number. Transactions. So this will be transactions by account number. So this will return transaction. This will also return transaction. This will return an array of transaction. There is no way for us to represent. Okay, let me just leave this for now. This will be an array anyway. Let's return a builder. Let's return a builder. Then we can also get transactions by the user ID, all the transactions that a user has been involved in, user ID. So for now, we are good. We'll keep increments. We'll increment it as the times. Okay. To satisfy one of our, we can also get transactions. Okay, let's leave it at that for now. Okay, we need a method to actually download transactions, which is one of the requirements. Download transactions history. So to download a transaction history, the first thing we need is the account that you want to download transaction history from, or we can even call it accounts. Let's accept the account DTO. Then we accept a carbon date of from dates, the start dates. Then we require a carbon of end dates, right? So this will return us a collection. Let's get this collection. Yeah. So let's go to our transaction service and implement all the required methods. Implement transaction service interface, and we implement all methods. All methods. Let me just okay, 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 okay. So we are good. So mm, okay, so we are good for now. So let's go on with our creation of transaction. So it accepts a transaction DTO. So in order to create a transaction, we need all the necessary data. So transaction, okay, we have the query already. Let's say this, you call it create transaction, no, model query, create, right? So we can actually convert a transaction to transaction DTO to an array. And convert, we can create to array method to get an array of a transaction DTO. Let's do this. So for deposit to array, let's do this. For deposit to array. So it will accept transaction DTO or yeah, let's pass it on a transaction DTO. It will accept a transaction DTO. Then we will return an array, return array, and we need the user ID. That will be transaction DTO dot get user ID. So user ID, we need the reference. We need the account ID. We need the category. We need the dates of the transaction, and we need the description. So this will be get reference. We'll get account ID. We'll get category. We'll get, okay, this will be dates, sorry, dates. Get dates. I'll get description. Okay, so we are good. So this will be an array. Yeah. So with this, we could easily go to our transaction service. We can easily say we are creating the transaction service. Sorry, we can easily just do this. We'll just say, let's say data equals to, so if the transaction DTO category is equals to transaction enum, deposit value. We can see our data is equals to transaction detail for deposits to array, deposits to array. I will pass in the transaction detail, right? This will be data. Let's call this let's set this one empty array. Otherwise, if it is withdrawal, for now let's set it to an empty array. Right. So then we pass in the data. Easy peasy, right? So this is us creating a transaction, then we return the transaction that was created. Should return a transaction. We go back to, I'm pretty sure we are working on create transaction. How come it's not throwing an error? Let me see the implementation. Okay, create transaction. So it returns a transaction. Let's just create transaction. Should return a transaction. Transaction service. So we are returning a transaction. So this will be transaction. Okay, we are good. So yeah, so this is how we create the transaction. If you go back to our deposit list now, we've created the transaction. Then if everything goes as expected, we need to actually update the actually update the transaction as well. We need to update the transaction balance, and we need to basically update the transaction balance. So let me say update transaction balance. What is the best name to? Okay, let's just call it reconcile transaction. Reconcile transaction. So if we check, I want to show if the reconcile transaction meaning. So the is process of comparing transaction and activity supporting documentation for the reconciliation results. Let me just call it updates transaction for now. Or we have the transaction, so we can just update it ourselves. The transaction is returned from this method. Yeah. So we can just say we don't need to create a new method for that. Transaction. Should we create a new method? I'm not sure. Let's create a new method in case we want some other things to happen after creation of the transaction. So let me just create this method in our service. I'll call it public function update transaction balance. For us to update the transaction balance, we need the balance and we need the reference of the transaction and the balance. So this is expected to be a string and this is expected to be a float or an int. So we can say this model query where reference is equals to the past reference updates the balance. Uh, balance, yeah, we are good. So I'm expecting that we get some errors. So this is the flow of depositing into the system. Let me just update this method. The transaction reference, um, reference, the transaction reference, then the account balance, the account balance, as at when the deposit was done. So if we check, check this, we are not supplying balance here. So as you can see, so I will explain this. So at the end of the lecture, so that of this session. So let's test our API now. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create a folder called account, then request deposits. Uh, So we'll go back to our code. Let me put this at this end. So if we go back to our API, we need to go to the controller. We are done with onboarding. So we need to create a new group. Let me call it account. It is a post method as usual. I call it deposits. So we need the account controller. We need the deposits method. Then we need the deposit method. So let's go into the account controller and create. Okay, let me create a new controller. The make controller deposit account deposit controller. Okay, let's go to our API. So this should be account deposit controller. Replace. Create a store method inside it. Create function store public. So our account deposits will be expecting a deposit request. Request. So let's create a request. Make request deposit request and import it. Deposit. We're going to import the class. So when we are depositing, we are expecting the account number you are depositing into, right? To be a string and to be a minimum of 10. And is required, right? The next thing we want to do is we want to accept the amount you are depositing, and this will be numeric, not a minimum set for this. We still set it, but I want us to catch some exceptions. Then description. Description. This will be minimum of, let's say minimum of 5 characters. Then we need I think that's all for now. That's all for now. So let's test. So let's go to our, let's go back to our let's go to Postman URL. Why is it not showing up? That's interesting. I think I need to restart my Postman. Let me just restart my Postman. Right. So let me see if my environment variables are blocked. Yeah, environment variables are blocked. So I want to deposit into the account. Let me just supply the URL / deposits. The account you want to deposit into. If we hit the API, method is not supported. So bearer token should be a post method. Yeah, validation error. So the account number is required, phone number is required, blah, blah, blah. So if you come here, JSON, account number, then we need the amount, then we need the description, right? So okay, description. So account number, let me just type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Random account number. Let me say amount 399. Let me say description. We are bluffing, right? So we can see account number must be at least 10 characters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. What do we get? Interesting. Okay, so that's because we've not done anything in our deposit account controller. Deposit accounts. Deposit accounts. What do we call it? Okay, account deposit controller. So the next thing we want to do now in this controller is we want to call our account service. Yes. Constructor account service, account service, account service, accounts. Okay, say private read only account service. We want to deposit into the account, right? So we say deposit. Why are we not saying deposit? It's public. Why am I not getting it in my controller? Account service, account service. This is just account service. Deposit, of course. Yeah. So it requires the deposit DTO. So our deposit DTO, I'm not sure. Have we created? Okay, we've created it. So our deposit DTO will be deposit DTO, deposit DTO, deposit DTO. Then we need to pass in all the required parameters. Deposit DTO, set account number, request, input, account number, CB underscore, account number, amount, description. Then we pass it into our deposit method. So great. So if let's try to do some stuff. Let me pass 7. So we can see type property amount must be assessed before initialization. Okay, set amount, set description. Then we need to set the category deposit, set category. So we actually don't need to pass any data to our category, since what we can do is we can remove this. We don't need any parameter. We know that the category, we don't even need a set method for this guy. We don't need a set method for this guy. Let's look for the setter. Say this. Yeah. So our category will always be this. So we don't need to set that guy. If we come back to our transaction service, no, I mean accounts deposit controller. We don't need to set it. It will be automatically set for us. So let's try to hit the endpoint again. What do we get? Now, deposit amount must be greater than 500. So we need to undo this exception. So that is what we'll be showing here. So if we go back to our handler, let's no, I want to move it up. Just put it here. So we want to amount deposit amount too low. It's an instance of deposit amount too low. Then we want to return this. So if we come back, it's the API. So you can see deposit amount too low. So we can easily display it to our user or whoever is consuming our API could easily pick it up. So if we return, give it 500, what do we get? We get invalid account number. So that's the invalid account number that we throw. If we go back to our deposit controller, deposits. So the first thing that was thrown here is the deposit amount too low. The next thing that happened here is we are checking if the account number exists. And now we are getting invalid account number. So we can then do this. We can then go to our handler again. We check for when that exception is thrown. Invalid account. Okay. Account number exception. So when that error is thrown, we want to catch it. So you see, we are getting invalid account number. So easy peasy. So now let's actually supply a valid account number. If we go to our database, let's pick a valid account number. Um, it's loading. So yes, so a valid account number, let's copy any account number. So the idea here is you can deposit into any account, either your own account or anybody account. It doesn't matter who is currently logged in. So we deposit into the account. Now, deposit return value must be of type model account, non-returned. So there is something that we are missing before we even treat this. We need to check if this user has even set a pin. Has this user even set a pin? Because if you remember, if we go back to our documentation, we remember that they said the user should set up PIN before performing any action in the system, and we've not actually satisfied that particular requirement from our document. If we go to API, so we need to create a middleware that will be checking if a user have actually set their PIN during the process of them trying to access our any endpoint that requires them to have set up a pin. So what we are going to do now is we are going to create a middleware to check if a user have set up a pin. So PA make middleware. Middleware. We can call it as set pin middleware. Middleware middle. Okay, this should be double L. Middleware. It's double D single L middleware. Okay. So we've created the middleware, so we need to go to the middleware. Set pin middleware. Then we need to do something. So we need to check, we need to get the currently authenticated user. Let me let my code editor know this is a user model. Then we need to call our account service. I don't want to create a constructor, so let me just say user service. New user service. We've already created a method in our user service to check if a user has set a pin. If the user service has set pin, right? If the user has not set pin, right, we are going to return a response. Respond. This returns a boolean, yes. So we need to use the API response rate here. Use API response rates. Respond. Let's say send respond error. Let me respond error. Send error. We say please set your pin to perform. Let's just say please set pin 401. Set your pin. Okay, brilliant. So we need to register the middleware in our kernel. We can call it as set pin. Just follow the Laravel way of doing things. And we can call it as set pin middleware. Let me copy this. Set. Let's see what's the name of the middleware that we created. A set pin middleware. Set pin middleware. Why is this not? A set pin middleware. Okay, brilliant. So now that we've done that, we can then go back to our API and wrap these methods into the as set pin middleware and into the APIs. The APIs, we don't want our users to be able to assess if they've not set a pin. So what we are going to do now is you can set up a pin, you can validate a pin. There's no point in validating a pin if you've not set up the pin. So let me move this out. Oh, no, let me leave it there. Then inside this, we create another group. Let's call it middleware. We'll call it as set pin, just like we registered it. Then group function, we open it up. So we can then move. Let me just copy this before. Why is this not? Okay. So move this here also. I'll copy all of this and move it here. So this way, a user will not be able to perform any action until they actually set up their PIN in the system. So if we, let's see, I'm not sure if this user has set up PIN. So let me try to set up PIN. API PIN could not be found. Why? Okay, we have the onboarding prefix. PIN is set successfully. So I want to do something just for us to be sure that what we are doing is right. Let me open a SQL workbench. So I want to check, I want to set back the user PIN itself. So I want to set it to null. So I need to go to the user account to see. Okay, let's continue anyway. So if we go to this guy, users, let me open it up. I want to set the pin to null. Apply for the both of them. I want to set it to null. Null. Apply. Close. So I want to set this to null to apply. To set it to null. Why? Apply. Let's go. Okay. So it's set to null now. So I want to try and execute an action. Let me say I want to validate a pin. So you can see the route API. Okay. I need to update my routes. So please set your pin. So this is the middleware kicking in. The middleware we set is kicking in now. So we need to set up the pin. Good. Now, if we come to validate pin, now you see pin validation false. That's because it is wrong. If we do it again, you can see it's valid, is true. So account number is generated already, so we don't need to worry ourselves. So let's try this again. Account service deposits return value must be of type account non-returned. Okay, let's see. Of course, why are we returning? Why are we returning account service? Something is wrong. Account service. Okay, is expecting. Okay, sure. Do we really need something to get returned? We don't really need that. So let's go back to our interface. Oh, yeah, we don't need it. We don't need it. Account. Let me go back to the controller. Account deposits controller. Are we expecting? Of course not. We are not. So let me just return this. This find success. Deposit successful. So if we come back here, right, to do that again, deposit successful, confirm. So good. So let's check, let's be sure, let's check our database. We know we've actually performed multiple deposits. So let's select post on the row. So you can see we've performed, our account balance is not being incremented. Let's check the transaction. Uh, select multiple. We are getting successful. Why what we've done is not working. So we need to check what is actually going on. We need to know what's going on. We need to know what's going on. So let me do some debugging. Account KTO. Let's be sure that we are getting our account. Okay, balance is 0. Perfect. Let's see what is coming from our deposit DTO as well. Deposit DTO 500. It is correct. So where is the, I think is the, in this our, okay, the event we are raising, we have not registered it in our event service provider. So we need to register our events. So we need to do this event, deposit event, deposit event class. We need to deposit listener class. So brilliant. So that should work now. If we come back now, good. We are getting a different error now. Could not found reference field in our to insert into account. We are not supposed to insert that into account. So let's see where that error is coming from. We came to here, we create a transaction. Let's see where the error is coming from. It's coming from, let's check. Okay, column ID line 822. Trying to get in the things that I need. Okay, let's check our error log. Error log. So if we check the last error that was logged, query exception could not be found. Yet that's when did this occur? And deposit events, line 20, deposit controller, line 28. See, line 28, deposit. You need to know the exact place that error was shown. Okay, let's just go one step at a time. At least, okay, is in transaction, create transaction line 29. So it is coming from create transaction. So if you go to transaction service, create transaction, model query, Oh, okay. You can see we made a mistake. We are applying creates on account model instead of the transaction model. So let's try again. Brilliant. So we are getting a different error now. It doesn't have a default value. So our transfer ID should be nullable. Our transfer ID should be nullable. So let's check our transactions. Transfer ID is not nullable. So we need to make it nullable. We need to make it nullable. So let me just create a new PA make migration. Let's say make transfer
Good
ID,
afternoon.
make transfer ID label on transactions table. Pass the table transactions. So if we come here, say transactions. Let me just copy. This is actually wrong. The transfer ID should be it should be on the transfer model. Transfers, transfer, transfers. What do we call it? Transfers. Okay. I'll wipe. I will do a clean. I'll do a clean. Let me delete this transfer ID and let me make it nullable. Nullable, not on delete. And it should be nullable. Yeah. Constraint account ID. What else do we want to be nullable? Okay. So let's do a fresh migration. PA migrate fresh. Okay, brilliant. So let's start from afresh. Let's register a user. Brilliant. Let's log in. Brilliant. Then let's set up our PIN. Brilliant. Now let's deposit. Okay, invalid account number. So what's the valid account number that we have? Account. Uh, If we go to account, why is it not being generated? Something is wrong. The account should have been generated. Okay, let me regenerate the account again. Account number generated. Why is my this thing closing? Okay, just leave it as that. So we can then do this. So we can, okay, let me just, who knows, something is wrong. Okay, let me remove this from presentation mode. I think it's actually, okay, let's get into, okay, it's been generated. I don't know why I was not getting. So if we come here and try to deposit into this account, okay, amount doesn't have a default value. Okay, so our amount for transactions needs to be nullable as well. Initially, there will be no amount. Oh, why am I not passing it? Come in, check. I should be passing it. Account controller, and deposit, accounts, controller, account deposits, controller, deposits. Let me maximize this view. The presentation mode. So saying the deposits is null. Deposits, listener, the account listener, account deposits listener, create transaction, transaction DTO. Let's see, transaction, transaction DTO. Retrieve this DTO. The amount is filled. So why? Okay. So deposit. Okay, this is where we are not setting it. We need the amount. Get come back. Balance doesn't have a default value. Balance does not have a default value. Okay, the balance of the user is at the point of performing the transaction. Okay. Transaction. Let me go to the listener. 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 HTTP. Listener. Create model for deposits. No, we are kind of updating it after we are updating the account balance after it has been after we are sure that the transfer has actually gone through. So that's what we are trying to do. So that means we might need to make the I need to make the balance field nullable as well. So we need to make the balance field nullable as well. So let me just come here. No. Yeah, so let's just rerun it as we've done it earlier. There it is. So if we come back, try to deposit, so of course it's authenticated. Let's register again. Then let's set up PIN. Okay, need to log in. Set up PIN. Then let's deposit invalid account number. Interesting. Okay, we've not generated the account number. Okay, deposit into our account. Deposit successful. Finally, we are able to deposit into our accounts. So if we check our account now, I believe we should have some money. Now, you see, we have 500 Naira in our accounts. So if we check the transactions table as well, that particular transaction will have been recorded. As you can see, you can see, you can see, you can see. So let's try to, you can see the reference that has been generated for us. So let's try to deposit 0. We should get an error. Deposit amount too low. So let's deposit 1,000. Let's call it for choice. That's it. Deposit successful. If we check the account balance, if we check our reference, let's check the reference first. So our transaction first. So you can see we have 1,500 as the new balance. The initial balance of the user before is 500. The new balance is now 15 because 1,000 Naira was deposited and is a type of deposit. Though this confirmed, the reason why we can do confirmed is okay, let's do something for our confirmed. Transaction service. During the process of updating the balance, we can say confirmed is true. At least we are guaranteed that everything has gone well at this point. So we can, if we perform another deposit now, our confirmed will be set to true. So as you can see, this one is now 1. So basically that is it for this session. I hope you were able to follow me. I know we've actually spent a very long time to get this to work. So I'll just run us through everything that we've done. So what we've done is we've created a way for users to deposit into their accounts. So let's say an amount, the account number, the amounts, and the description. So when they hit that particular API, when that particular API is hit, we come into the deposit controller. We set the account, we set the amount, the description, the deposits. Then we go into the deposit method. We check. So we check. The first thing we check is we check if the account exists. If the account exists, if we are okay. Otherwise, we throw an exception. Then we lock the account for updates by picking the first one. Then we get a DTO of the locked account. We create a transaction DTO for the deposits. Then we throw an event. We create an event. We dispatch an event called deposit event. Inside the deposit event, we have our listener called deposit listener. Then the first thing we do is we create a transaction to start the transaction. Then we say, okay, then we get the locked accounts. Then we increment the user's account by the amount that was deposited. Then we save the account, then we refresh the account and then pass the account balance into the transaction and also sets pass the reference. So what this does is it updates the transaction balance, then also updates the confirmed to true. So basically, that is what we've done. So if any error occurs during the process of performing our transaction, none of the process that we have initiated earlier will actually take place. So that will be the end of this session. I know it is quite long and I was not even expecting it to be this long. I hope you have been able to stay with me during the process of this session and I hope you enjoyed it. The next section will be moving into transfer. We'll be moving to withdrawal. Users should be able to withdraw from their accounts seamlessly. So that will be the end, and I hope you enjoyed this session. And next session, I also look to actually force the user to provide their PIN before performing any transaction. So that is one of the things that we are going to. For deposits, we don't need them to provide a PIN since they are putting money into the system. But for withdrawal, we will request the users to provide a PIN before withdrawing money from their accounts. See you next time. If you enjoy, please share with your friends. It's like and so on. Thank you very much. Goodbye.